Good afternoon, friends, neighbors, countrymen, barrel-chested freedom fighters from all around the world. Hey, man, it's another tale from the patrol base, and we got a very special guest. We got retired Army Colonel Mark Herlick. Did I say your last name right, but my friend?
You did. You promoted me twice, though.
Oh, okay. Well, I think you deserve to be a colonel.
Can
Okay.
I get the? I'll take the pay though.
Yeah. And man, he's a distinguished, very distinguished guy. He spent most of his career enlisted. He was a Echo 51st guy in Europe, and he did a bunch of stuff with the 101st. He was a Pathfinder Company commander for the 101st. He was the RSLC commander down at Fort Benning during a very challenging time, which we will discuss. And hopefully, he can tell us some good stories about it. And Mark, I just want to welcome you to the show and say, man, I'm really glad to talk to you and get some stories and get some LRS history out. Oh, I also forgot to mention, he is the current president of the Long Range Reconisance Association. So,
Well, thanks for having me.
hey, man, not a problem, not a problem. And I think you told me you started your career out in the Marine Corps.
I did. I grew up south of Detroit,
Mm-hmm.
so there were three things you did when you graduated. You worked in the auto factories,
Mm-hmm.
went to college, and you joined the military. So my dad wasn't paying. My dad was not paying for my college.
Yeah.
And hindsight being 2020, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted away from him and I wanted away from home. So
Yeah.
I had a friend that was in the Marines, and he came home one time on leave, and I had just turned 18. So
Mm-hmm.
I went down and I enlisted after watching Heartbreak Ridge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing because the the gunny on Heartbreak Ridge that was the jump master and the rappel master ended up being my company first sergeant in Desert Storm.
Wow. That's kind of funny.
Yeah. So anyway, I joined, spent 4 years in the infantry, with 3-1 in the Corps, and I got
Hmm.
years and enlisted in the Army.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, what brought? Was there like a break in service between the Corps, the Army, or just?
Yeah, this is right after Desert Storm, so they were drawing down. The Army was going from, I don't know what, 15,
Yeah.
16 divisions to 10. The
Yeah.
Marine Corps was shrinking.
Hmm.
So I was offered, two choices. I could have went to MSG, which is Embassy Guard, or
Yeah.
get out. And for the people that know me, I'm not very politically correct, so I opted to get out.
That was
And
probably a wise decision based on my experience with the MSG.
it was. So I got out, and then, I ended up moving to Charlotte, North Carolina.
Hmm.
After a couple of years, I felt that itch because I liked the infantry. So I went down, and I would have had to wait 18 to 24 months to get back in the Marines. And
Yeah.
then the recruiter took me over to the Army, and
Hmm.
she said, "You need to put this guy in." So I went there, and he offered me infantry, and he offered me three choices, which was Drum, Korea, or Fort Campbell, the 101st.
Hmm.
I knew who the 101st was, and
Yeah.
I signed in. I went to the 101st in 1994.
All right. Good deal. And it started from there, man. What was your first? Where'd you wind up there in the 101st?
So at the time, I had a friend that I had served in the Marines with. He was trying to be a warrant officer. He wanted to fly.
Hmm.
So at that time, 11 series were door gunners.
Yeah.
So they had not closed it yet. So he was down in the aviation side of the house, and I had reached out to him. I said, "Look, I'm coming to Fort Campbell. What's the best brigade to go to?"
Hmm.
And he's like, "If you want to spend time in the field, go to third brigade, the Rockisans."
Hmm.
I'm like, "What about first and second?" He goes, "Yeah, no, not so much."
Yeah.
So I'm like, "Okay." So I called out there, and I got a hold of the sergeant major. Um, just by chance, it was second battalion.
Yeah.
So there was a letter of acceptance for me. So when I rolled into Fort Campbell, the first thing I did was go down to second to 187th, got my letter of acceptance,
Yeah.
and then went to replacement. And then at that time, you had to go see the strength management people in replacement.
Yeah.
for most people, they think everything was done on computers back then. Yeah, it wasn't.
No,
It
it
was
wasn't. We were
pen,
still on
paper, typing on orders.
carbon
Yeah,
paper ruled.
absolutely. So I didn't see a computer until, God, 1997, 98. Anyway, so the lady's like, "You're going to Second Brigade." I'm like, "Oh no, I have the trump card."
Hmm.
So no pun intended, but I'm like, "I've got the trump card."
Hmm.
And she looked at it and she goes, "Oh, you really want to go to the Rockisans?" I'm like, "Absolutely." She goes, "Fair enough." So I ended up being assigned to Bravo Company, second to 187th down there.
Oh, that's yeah. What? Oh, I started to think this. I had a question. My train of thought derailed. Let's go on. So what was kind of the best part of the being down there at that
Oh
time?
my God. It was, I was single at the time.
Hmm.
So my 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 lifestyle would have killed probably 95% of the civilians I know.
Oh yeah.
So my first impression of the unit was wasn't very good. So
Hmm.
I got picked up from replacement by this guy named Jaskow. And I wear him the high tech. He had the high tech boots on, the aviator sunglasses,
Yeah.
and he had his hat all not Ranger roll, but how they pull it forward like that.
Hmm.
And his BDUs they were at max tensile strength. One more burger and the buttons would have fell off. So
Yeah.
he was, they always say first impressions are lasting impressions, but
Yeah.
all he did was complain
Yeah.
about how much time they spent in the field and how much PT they did.
Hmm.
I rolled into the CP and I come in and I dismissed Jaskow. It started rolling from there because we didn't have an officer at the time.
Yeah.
We had Staff Sergeant Promotable Mike Haney, who was the PL,
Hmm.
and then we had Staff Sergeant Rivera, who barely spoke any English
Hmm.
that a northerner like me could understand. He
Yeah.
was platoon sergeant. So I got in and he the first question he asked me in his Puerto Rican accent was, "What are you, some college pretty boy? Because you came in here as a specialist with
Hmm.
airborne wings," because I went to airborne school in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Haney asked me, "Do I want to be an M60 gunner or a grenadier?" And I'm like, "I'll carry the 203 because that's what I did in the Marines."
Hmm.
And then it he it was how he took all of us and built us into this cohesive team.
Hmm.
Looking back on it, he was in my first probably 5 years in the Army, the most influential person that I dealt with. Even when he left the platoon, he was still an influence.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't for Haney in his pushing everybody to be better, I
Hmm.
would have never went to Ranger School, which would have never opened the doors, which would have never led to all this stuff hanging on the wall back
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So he was the epitome of the kind of platoon sergeant you wanted.
Hmm.
Um, no task was too hard. Anything could be accomplished. He hated legs.
Yeah.
He was an airborne guy.
Yeah.
Served in the 82nd, spent some time in Ranger Regiment, I
Hmm.
think 1st Battalion, and he was a door gunner during Desert
Hmm.
Storm.
Hmm.
But to tell you how crazy the guy was, we went to JRTC. He got killed, sent to the PHA.
Yeah.
And excuse me, so we're in our little company perimeter, and it's the middle of the night, and all you hear is, "God damn it, who put the fucking bungee cord in the way?"
Hmm.
He had left the PHA, walked across Fort Polk
Oh wow.
to find the company.
That's
You know, and it was,
dedication.
yeah. And at the time, our company commander was Michael Donnelly, and he's like, it's my bungee cord. Who the fuck is that? And it was Sergeant Haney, sir. He goes, where'd you come from? He goes, I came from the Piha. He's like, oh, okay, just find a spot. We'll take care of you when daylight comes up.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, yeah. So, you know, it was, and he believed in it's a job of ability, not of rank. And I think that stuck to me throughout my whole career.
Yeah.
So, you know, we had sergeants that weren't team leaders because they didn't have the ability. So he built his team leaders and squad leaders from within the platoon.
Yeah.
He didn't want outside entities, unknown factors coming in. So that, you know, there's an influential person in the Army, he would be number one. And then all my first sergeants I had up till Pacheco, they were all veterans of Panama jumping in from regiment. So we had that mentality of, you know, shoot, move, communicate, first aid, and PT, the big five. And that had stuck with me throughout my whole career. And so 2nd to the 187th was the foundation of my entire Army career. But I also fell back onto the leadership examples I had in the Marine Corps, and I kind of put them together. They kind of mixed and blended.
Yeah. Okay. We did, and you said he was the one that recommended you go to Ranger School?
Yeah. So, you know, one day we were all joking around, and, you know, the promotion scores were 798 maxed. And I had already, you know, completed air assault school. I was maxed on correspondence courses, had my EIB. And he sat down and he started doing some mentorship one-on-one, kind of just like us talking.
Yeah.
He's like, look, if you plan on making the Army a career as an infantryman, you need to go to Ranger School. And he goes, it's not for promotion, but he laid it out like number one, number two, number three. This is the benefit it pays.
Yeah.
You know, not just promotion, but leadership under stress. You know, how to slow everything down in time, space, you know, and kind of be able to process everything under stress, no sleep, you know. And at that time I was an E4, you know, I was a corporal, and it was, you know, kind of daunting because, you know, you got to remember, I had these first sergeants that had been in regiment, tabbed, jumped into Panama, and he was tabbed and served in regiment. He was a door gunner during Desert Storm, you know. And I'm like, so finally I went in and I said, sign me up for pre-ranger.
Yeah.
And it was a division, it was 101st Division pre-ranger. We're at a brigade pre-rangers, and it was probably one of the best schools that I've ever been to when it came to teaching. They still stress you, but, you know, I still remember one of my instructors. He's a retired Sergeant Major Craig Purdue, which I ran into later when I went back to RTB as a commander. But he would stop us and say, take 10, we're going to discuss in the middle of movement what we did well and what we did horribly on. In that southern, like, Kentucky accented draw. Phenomenal. And he's like, look, it's an open book test. You got the Ranger handbook, read it, exit friendly lines, inner friendly lines, just go down the checklist and you're good. So that, you know, without that, you know, without that mentorship, not only from Haney, but from the first sergeants in the Ranger instructors there, you know, I would have never achieved what I had, what I ended up getting to.
Okay, that's cool. What years what year class did you go to?
So I graduated in 1996, and I want to say, hang on a second. '96. We graduated 10 July.
All right, good.
1996.
All right. And so you finish that up, you're headed back to the 101st, do great and glorious things, and you get back. What's going on, man?
Man, so we got back. I went on leave. And then Kobar Towers happened. you
Yeah.
know, that. So Cobar Towers got blown up, and at that time I was in what was PLDC back then. So I was in the middle of PLDC, and you know, at that time I'm still an E4. So I'm tactical. I'm not,
Yeah,
thinking,
you're very focused on what's in front of you.
all right. So they ended up somehow Alpha Company and Bravo Company, we were tagged to go over to Saudi Arabia and provide security for the RSENT Patriot bases.
Yeah.
So they had them in, Dhahran, which is right out. You could see the lights of Bahrain from the tower. And then there was an air base just north of us, a couple miles. And I can't remember what it was called, but there was also one further down in Qatar. So, we were tasked with that. So I ended up going to advance party on Thanksgiving in 1996 with a couple other people. We spent Thanksgiving in Frankfurt, and then we got on a plane and we ended up in Saudi Arabia. Then the rest of the company came over, and we ended up staying there for 6 months, I think it was. Yeah, about 6 months, in providing security on that installation there.
Yeah. Well, that's not a bad way to rent. Well, I mean, depends on your perspective. It could be either a great time or a bad time, depending on
It was a learning experience, because now instead of you're pulling, static security in towers, and I was a sergeant at the time, so we were pulling front gate duty, tower duty, had roving patrol duty. So it was just like a regular, you do so many days on, have so many days off. And you got to learn a lot about your people, because my whole fire team slept in the same room. We had this one big room, 4 different beds, and we just rolled with it.
You learn a lot when you live with somebody full time like that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. The strengths, weaknesses, and everything. So after there, where'd you go after that?
So after that, we came back, and then we went down to JRTC again, but now it went down there, did some back 40 rotations at Campbell, and then I ended up getting married. So at that time, my ex-wife, was an Apache pilot.
Yeah.
So she was coming down on orders, and she had a couple places to go. And so we ended up getting married, and I let Branch know, because I wanted to go to Hawaii when I was single. But that changed when I got married. So he's like, she was on orders to Germany, and he had the Army Married Couple program at the time. So I ended up, this was before email. So, you called your branch manager, your service manager, and you built that relationship with them. So he's like, I can send you to one place in there. There's one place I'm going to send you. And I'm like, where is he? He's like, Echo Company 51st. I'm like, what is it? He's like, it's a long range surveillance unit. I'm like, I'm there.
Yeah.
I had a squad leader named Doug Drennan, who had come to Campbell to the same company from Echo 51st. So he would tell us, and I'm like, hey, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I, fast forward, I did the rest of my time at Campbell and ended up going to Germany.
Yeah. What was your first impression when you showed up at Echo Company?
My first impression in Germany was, this is all fucked up, because I got the replacement, and you got everybody there, and I already had pinpoint orders.
Yeah.
People running a replacement are like, well, we may not send you there. I'm like, but this is where I'm going.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can I leave? I've got orders. And they're like, well, you have to have an officer sign you out. So my wife at the time signed me out, and we drove up to Hanau, and and that's where we were going to have quarters. So we drove up to Hanau, and then I ended up going down to report to the company. And at that time, my the first sergeant wasn't there. He was in the first sergeant's course.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I rolled in and it was a debate of what platoon I was going to.
Yeah.
So I ran into Sergeant First Class Martinez, who was an at the time RRD guy
Yeah.
from regiment.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Holbrook was a platoon sergeant First Class. He was an old LRSC detachment guy from the 101st, I think when it was still under the Cav.
Yeah.
Then you had Sergeant First Class Cruz. So I ended up going to Sergeant, I ended up going to 3rd Platoon Sergeant First Class Cruz. So there was a wide disparity of knowledge in that company when it came to platoons. So 3rd Platoon wasn't bad. I made some great people, met some great people, did some great work. But when the first sergeant came rolling in, it was Ray Devins.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up getting deployed Kosovo.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up going from 3rd to 1st. And that's where I kind of blossomed because of the mentorship and of Martinez, Sergeant Martinez and First Sergeant Devins. So, you know, and then there was a couple other NCOs like CDIG and stuff that sat down with me and with the deliberate planning, how we did in LRSC. And I became a very good planner, which carried over further in my career. But that was, you know, I would say the first year was kind of rough.
Yeah.
Because we're, as 11 series, we're at a distinct disadvantage.
Yeah.
When you go to LRSC, because it's not your primary job like a 19 Delta. Once you come in as a 19 Delta, you're a 19 Delta for your whole career.
Well, LRSC to kind of deprogram guys.
It is. So you know, we had a company commander, Eric Lane, and you know, there was a lot of we don't like this guy. And the reason a lot of the older guys didn't like him because he pulled out the 7-8 and said, this is what we follow, which now that I'm retired, and I thought about this a lot after he left, he was not wrong.
Yeah.
Because it is the doctrinal Bible of the infantrymen.
Yeah.
How to break contact. You know, what happens when you take contact, near ambush, far ambush. It doesn't matter if you're a company, platoon, or a LRSC size element. It's doctrine. The basics still apply.
Yeah.
So, and I carried that little snippet throughout my whole career. You know, so he took us to Kosovo, and then it was time for change of command. So, you know, Captain Lane left, and but he set the foundation with all of the training evolutions for our success when we got there. And then we had John Scott Nelson come in.
Yeah.
Came from Vicenza, Italy. So him and Devins were like Batman and Robin. You know.
Yeah.
They were just a great command team. They got along, and you know, they were counterbalances to each other. And then, you know, I hit my stride in Kosovo, and I learned so much under those two. And then
were you a team leader at this time, or were you a
team? I was. So we got to do some real world missions out there that Kosovo was the proving ground, you know, the litmus test of all the doctrinal stuff that had been compiled over the years. So we went there. We were the first LRSC unit in there. And it was like building a house from scratch. You know, how do we send imagery over FM, over the 119s? That got figured out. You know, it was also figured out that you can't share SATCOM channels with other units, because as soon as they key the mic, all your imagery goes away.
Yeah.
So you need dedicated channels. It was also where we figured out that, I'm going to use this term loosely, the conventional Army doesn't like you being out of comms for hours and hours. So we had to go.
They do.
Yeah. So we rolled down to, I think it was 4 or 6 hour comma windows instead of the usual 12. But what people don't realize also during that time, the Serbians still had special forces that they'd left behind. So it wasn't like a passive training environment in Central Region Germany. There were actually people out there that were actively looking for you to kill you.
Yeah.
So it was, and we were successful in proving all this stuff. So there's a book on it that a retired major Gebhardt wrote about LRSC stuff.
Gebhardt, I remember reading his he had a paper. I remember
that is the paper. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
I've got it somewhere. Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, I got the book someplace back there. So that is where we found out about communication windows, burst train, all this other stuff. And then we redeployed after about 6 months. And then
what kind of targets were you all taking a look at when you were in Kosovo, or what did it kind of?
So it was more. There were a couple of times it was specific houses up on the side of the hill, looking at specific houses. So the one was, there was this one house that we thought it was a C2 command control. Back then it was C2 command and control site. So we set up we had to combine hide and surveillance because the terrain just wasn't
conducive.
Yeah, it wasn't tenable until we figured it out. So then we ended up splitting after the leader's recon. And then it was the only time I've ever put a surveillance site up in a tree. It was just like we were on the side of a hill, but this tree went up and it was like the branches were perfectly formed like a deer stand.
Yeah.
We put up the sniper flash, had everything snap linked in, the scope, the camera with the big lens on it and everything. And we were looking at this house, but you could see down the valley to the right. And every time the helicopters would come down at night, the valley, the little villages would shut off their lights. And when the helicopter passed, they'd flip it on. So we noted it. And the thing that I remember about this house is their antennas on the house, the satellite dishes and the antennas were pointing in the wrong direction. They were pointing, instead of pointing to the west, they were pointing to the northeast, back up into Serbia.
Yeah.
So, it's just small stuff. So in the other missions, it was, you were looking at NAI's terrain.
Yeah.
Looking at crossing sites, suspected crossing sites, looking for cache sites. So we also did some active reconnaissance there. So we also went out to a place where I can't remember if he was a Muslim or a Christian, because it get kind of convoluted. That we went out there and there was a murder out there, and it was supposed to be a pretty active NAI, but we didn't really see much out there, goat herders and stuff. So then I ended up coming back, advanced party, and I think they turned it over to the 101st guys. So
sounds like a productive tour, and I learned a lot.
Well, we also did, what else helped with that was we did always insert via air. So we did one that was convoy. So we were in the vehicles just like everybody else.
Yeah.
As passengers, and every so often they would stop, shut the lights off, go to the front vehicle and do a map check.
Yeah.
But everybody got out like they were pulling security. So at a predetermined point, all the lights were out. They were up on the front doing map check, and we got out like we were doing security, but we just kind of faded away into the woods.
Kind of like the in Vietnam when the LRSC would go out with an infantry company, and then they just kind of break off.
Yep, exactly. So it was, it was interesting because at the time I was married, my wife was also flying Apache support. Wow. And then you had guys from the United Arab Emirates, flying Apache support, and it was interesting talking to them because of their broken English, but it was a great experience.
Mhm.
And a lot of those guys that were in the company at the time ended up deploying for the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's great. And that's great to do stuff, but what we're doctrinally we're supposed to do, because LRS, we were so misused so often. Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. So you come back from Kosovo. What's the next step after Kosovo?
Oh my God. So I got back and I wanted to do a consecutive overseas tour,
Hmm.
but I ended up coming down on orders for RTB.
Hmm.
And so I did not want to be a ranger instructor. I
Hmm.
was a LRS guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got a hold of Branch and I said, "Hey, where am I going?" And he's like, "There's only one place I'm sending you." And I said, "Please, for the love of God, don't send me to be an RI."
Yeah.
He goes, "Nope, they're going down to Delta Company, 4th RTB."
Mm.
I'm like, fair enough, because I knew what it was, LRSLC.
Lurch Lick. Was it
Yep.
still Lurch Lick then, or did they
You
change?
know, it was still LRSLC.
Yeah.
So I ended up leaving. We ended up leaving Germany right after 9/11.
Hmm.
So September 11th it happened. My son was born the 22nd
Yeah.
of September. And then I PCS by myself because she left with the kids as soon as
Hmm.
we could get them out of there. Because
Yeah.
we didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
So she had already submitted her papers to resign, not fly anymore. Um, so they left a couple months before, about a month and 2 months, month and a half before I did.
Hmm.
So she went back home, and I closed out post housing and did all my clearing, and then got on a plane and went home, and then we ended up driving down to Fort Benning,
Hmm.
where I became a I became a LRSLC instructor, but I still had to go through the course.
Yeah. Oh, you hadn't been yet.
Yeah. So yeah, I got down to LRSLC, and that's where the doctrine versus experience kind of came into play.
Hmm.
So I met a whole bunch of phenomenal people down there,
Yeah,
and it
that's a big
was
cadre.
it was it was great. And at that time, you know, it was the Army was shrinking. There was word on the block that they were going to shrink, and the LRS guys.
Yeah.
It wasn't confirmed yet, but luckily the uh, the commander that came in was Mike Larson, and he
Hmm.
had this vision. He's like, "Hey, everybody does reconnaissance some way, so to attract, you can only bring in so many LRS guys from the
There's just
divisions,
not that many.
right? So
Yeah.
you're dealing with 10 divisions and 2 core LRS companies,
Yeah.
which the population is not very big."
And then you
Um,
get the guard companies or detachments.
correct.
Yeah.
And at that time, Vicenza, the 173rd, had stood up a detachment, which when
Hmm.
I was in Echo Company, I went down with a couple other guys and we kind of mentored them. Um,
Hmm.
I think Colonel Yarborough was the commander at the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they changed the name. I went through when it was LRSLC, but when I got done and got certified as instructor, they they were changing the name to the Reconnaissance Surveillance Leaders Course,
Hmm.
which now you open it up to the whole population, not the Army and all the other sister services.
Yeah.
So yeah, so which which in hindsight was probably a great move.
Yeah.
So you
I
were
thought
yeah,
I thought it was a good idea because you get, unlike there's some units that other organizations, they get very stagnant because they do everything in house.
yeah,
And heck yeah, have some SF guys come in, have some Marine recon guys, even some scouts from the line. spread the knowledge.
Well, I think it paid dividends in 2003, 4 into 2005, because once the invasion of Iraq happened, we had forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. Your school population dwindled.
Yeah.
Because infantry guys were deployed, scouts were deployed, LRS units were deployed. So now who do you draw? Do you draw? What population do you draw from to keep this? And I hate this word, but it's a trade-off. Keep the school viable.
Yeah.
So then you start, you got the sister services in, and at that time we were getting a lot of SF guys in. So, they
had a strategic recon course, but I think they closed it.
They did. So, as you go further down as you go further down the years, they lost a lot of their communications expertise when it came to HF, because everything is pick up a sat phone, a Iridium phone, or hop on SATCOM. Well, HF was always the bread and butter. So we were the only institution that taught HF comms.
Yeah.
So, and we had guys at the commo chiefs and everything, that were in LRS units running, base stations and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was good. And then I went to ANOC, and then I stayed as an instructor there till 2005.
Okay. Well, what happened in 2005?
So a bunch of us. So what people don't realize is Delta Company was in RTB itself. At least 4th Battalion was a feeder into the SF community.
Yeah.
Not just, but for Delta Company, it was SF and OCS, and we had one guy go off to Delta. So anyway, we were all sitting around, and it was we had already been preached to by Branch, saying, "Hey, once your time's up here, you are out of here. You are not staying. You are not fenced. You're going back to the force."
Yeah.
So, I had gone through ANOC, and I was promoted to Sergeant First Class, and I did some soul searching, and I talked it over with the ex-wife, because we were still on good terms then. And then I didn't want to be a first sergeant, and nothing against first sergeants. I just didn't want to be one.
It's not that fun.
Yeah, I didn't want to be a first sergeant. I wanted to stay with the guys.
Yeah.
So in the Army was growing at the time. They were bringing up these 4th brigades. So I'm like, you know what? Why not give OCS a shot? So I filled out the packet, applied for the time and service, time and grade, and age waiver.
Yeah.
Went to the local board, answered a couple questions, sat there and BS with the board members for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And he the major that was the head of the board goes, "Just gonna ask you one more question before you leave." I'm like, "What is there?" He goes, "Are you sure you want to stay in the infantry?" I'm like, "Absolutely, man." So stamped it, boom, bang. And then myself and one other guy that I remember got picked up from Delta Company, and we went across Fort Benning to OCS.
I'm sure that was not it was probably for an E7 at OCS. I imagine that was there was a lot of blocks.
So
yeah.
Yeah. So OCS is, ROTC commissions about 70% of the officers the Army has, followed by OCS, and then
West Point.
So I got there, and I had long hair. I refused to get a high and tight. I roll in, and I signed in, and they're like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Here's my orders. I'm here." And it was the blind leading the blind. They're like, "Go pick a room." I'm like, okay. So I go up to the 3rd floor, and being the wise old Sergeant First Class, you don't want to be in a room near the top of the stairwell because that's who they're coming to pick extra duty.
Yeah.
I hung on the left and went all the way to the last room on the left, stored my gear, made my bed, and I was sitting there dipping Copenhagen, and this old combat engineer rolls in named Jesse Moore, and he had made, we didn't know at the time, but he was on the promotion list for Master Sergeant. He was a combat engineer.
Oh,
so
wow.
we roomed together, and he dipped Skull and I dipped Copenhagen. But what we didn't know at the time was across the hall was a female room. We were on the female end.
Oh.
Yeah, so the last 6 rooms were supposed to be female rooms, but there were no signs up. But we had already put our stuff up on hangers and we did everything. So place started filling up, and the cadre come up and they're like, "Hey," and we're like, "What's up, sir?" And he's, "You're in a female room." Like, no one told us. And he looked in, and he walked in, and our wall lockers were open, and he saw the ranks already on it and everything, because we hadn't been on, we're not officers yet, so we still have our enlisted rank on there.
Yeah.
So he looked and he goes, "Oh, you're both starting first classes?" We're like, he goes, "You guys stay right here. I'm not too much worried about you guys."
Yeah.
So we stayed down the whole time, and we never got moved, and we never got picked for extra duty because we weren't near the stairs.
Yeah.
But it was a good experience, but a worthless experience at the same time.
I can,
and the way it was explained is, we have you guys here, the prior service people, so you can guide these kids through, which were college graduates that went through basic training. All of a sudden, boom, they're a sergeant and they're an OCS.
for all practical purposes, you were assistant instructors.
Correct.
Yeah.
But the population for the prior service guys was insane. So you had me and another guy from RTB, LRSC guys. You had an SF guy that was on a direct action team. You had another SF guy, and you had a guy who was a CW3, and he wanted to fly fixed wing, and the only way he could fly fixed wing was to be a commissioned officer. So with the OCS, I mean, it was crazy. And I still keep it, like, my best friend from OCS. She's retired now. She lives down in Georgia. She was a loggy, sergeant. Yeah. So it was a good experience, but it was, I don't know, 14 weeks standing on my head, picking my nose.
Yeah.
Because it's like, too many chiefs, not enough Indians.
Yeah. It is what it is. Well, I mean, eventually you got out of there, knocked Ibolic in the head.
Ibolic, another phenomenal experience, but I mean, like my cadre said, what are we going to teach you that you haven't already done?
Yeah. Yeah. I've been an instructor over at 4th RTB. I know what the officer looks like.
Yeah. It was, the funniest time I had there is they pulled us all into a room in Building 4, because it was still Building 4 at the time. And they're like, "Here's your 4187 in front of you." And we're like, "What's this?" "It's for Ranger School. You accept or you decline." And at the time, BDUs, nothing. Just a Fort Benning patch and second lieutenant rake and cross rifles, nothing else. And I'm like, "Hey, Sergeant, I got a question." And it was basically, shut up, accept, decline, sign. And I'm like, and I was one of those rebels. I'm like, fine, decline, signed it, turned it in. So they take it, we go to class, and then they're like, "Hey, the TAC needs to see you." And I'm like, "Company commander to see you." I'm like, "Fair enough." Okay. So I'm like, "What's this about?" And they're like, all I got was your 4187. And I'm like, "Okay." So I had a friend there that I was going through Ibolic with. So I kept a couple of uniforms. He was staying at whatever hall was there.
Yeah. Olson or whatever.
Olson Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went in and I changed into a BDU top that had all the stuff on it. So I go up there and I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to see, I think it was Captain Benson.
Yeah.
And they're like, knock on the door and he's like, who is it? I'm like, sir, it's Second Lieutenant Herlick. He's like, get in here. So I'll roll in and his face was down and he's like, so Ranger training. I'm like, what's up, sir? And he looked up, he goes, does this? And he goes, why did you put decline? I'm like, because I went to ask a question. They said either accept or decline. And I said, I'm not going to recertify. So yeah, he's like, have a seat. So I just had a seat and we were talking for a little bit. And he just wanted to know what my background was.
Yeah.
Because you can look at a person's ORB or ERB, but it doesn't give you a lot about the person.
Yeah.
So we talked for about 10 minutes and he kicked me out of his office and that was that. So yeah. And then me and the other prior service guys that had graduated OCS together, we just basically kind of mentored they were kids to us. They were 23-year-old, 24-year-old lieutenants, so we just mentored them on, is more not in-depth operations orders, but quick warning TLPs, quick warning orders, boom, bang, gone, and start rolling because, the whole 72-hour, 24-hour planning process was shot out the window.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to sit down in a combat environment while you're out roaming the deserts, and you're not going to be able to sit there for 48, 70 hours.
Yeah, no, you're not.
So, and then I graduated IOBC and went back to Fort Campbell.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Did you go back to the Reconnaissance or?
No. So I back to Mike Larson again. So I was graduating OCS and I got an email. He had gone through ILE and he was out at Fort Bragg, 18th Airborne Corps. And I got an email from him saying, hey, once you graduate, where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go back to, because, it's at building relationships and stuff. I said, I want to go back to Fort Campbell. Like, fair enough. So I had orders back to Fort Campbell and I had orders to 1st Brigade. So at that time, I wasn't too hip on going to 1st Brigade.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to 3rd Brigade.
Yeah.
Because it was a known entity.
Yeah.
So officer manning's a bit different than enlisted manning.
Yeah, I don't think they like to repeat. Yeah, they want to move you
correct around. So if you're an enlisted guy, you're gonna stay there probably 3 to 4 years. As a senior NCO.
Yeah.
As a lieutenant, you're gonna get, we'll say, 18 months, and then you're moving on. So our manning cycles are every 6 months, January and June. So I ended up going to Campbell and it was a ghost town. Because this is 2000, beginning of 2006, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So the whole division's gone at that time. And they're all in Iraq. So I had talked to the rear D at 3rd Brigade, and I actually rolled in and said, hey, can I come down here? I got orders to mass stone. Yeah. So anyway, it never came to fruition, which in hindsight was really good. Because at that time, the brigade commander was Colonel Steele from Black Hawk Down fame. So I ended up going down to 1st Brigade with my orders, and I reported into brigade, and they walked me down to 1st Battalion, and I met the rear D commander there, and he's like, "Okay, you got a house? Got a house. You know, you got any schools? I'm like, I don't need to go to any schools. I've been to RSLC. There's nothing else. He's like, okay, you're going to go. At the time, the 101st had pre-deployment training. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
go through this. And I was like, damn it. You know, I'm
Yeah.
like, come on, man. I said, I'm an old guy. I said, there's not much you're going to tell me in here, but it
Yeah.
was a mandated thing. So how crazy this place is as I was going through this training, the division chemo was in my class.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, you need to go to the gas chamber. He's like, I'm the division chemo. I'll
Mo,
just, you know, so I ended up, you know, 3rd Brigade's, you know, I ran into some SF guys. You know, I ran into one that I knew down there that I was in LRS with. So, you know, we were eating breakfast. I was eating breakfast one day by myself, and I was still in BDUs because I hadn't got my whatever those things were, not OCPs, but
yeah.
the gravelly camouflage pattern that
The
everybody
chocolate
get.
chips and the 3 colors.
Yeah, now these were not
the 3 colored desert. Yeah.
now this was like before what we have now. It was
Yeah.
the
Oh,
whole,
ACU. Yeah.
yeah, the ACU. So I'm sitting there in BDUs eating down at the 3rd Brigade DFAC,
Yeah.
and there was a bunch of SF guys over there. So one actually comes over and he goes, "Hey, where'd you get all that stuff?" And I said, you know, if you spent $5.50 on it, clothing and sales, you could have some free fall wings too. So he left and went back, and then I look over and there was a guy I knew from Germany.
Yeah.
We were in the same reception class, and he came over, and you know, we did the secret squirrel handshake, and yeah, it was good. And then I ended up going through all that mess, and then I ended up getting on a plane and going to Iraq with the 1st Brigade. So
Yeah.
I got there and sat around for a little bit, and I ended up in Kirkuk, and then went down and saw the Echo Company guys because they were there.
Yeah.
So, you know, there were a couple guys that I had served with in RSLC that went to OCS the class or two before me, and they were in Echo Company as an officer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I spent that first deployment maybe 6 months or so.
Yeah.
In Bob McHenry, glorious place. So it was it was an eye opener, because now I'm not a LRS guy.
Yeah.
I'm an infantry
guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, and we're running Humvees up and down the road waiting to get blown up. So, you know, at that time I had a really crappy first sergeant.
Yeah.
I had a company commander who was not really engaged. So he was more of the do as I say, not as I do. And he was always looking for, you know, to blame somebody for something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he wasn't very well liked.
Yeah.
I mean, he was so liked, somebody took a dump in his seat in his Humvee before they got on a helicopter and left country.
Yeah.
So, but that's where I started to learn, because I had not had a bad officer. And when everybody's like, what do you mean bad officer? There's officers that are good and there's officers that are bad. And when I say bad, I talk about not so much leadership style, it's presence.
Yeah.
You know, in inspiring confidence, and actually getting to know your people, you know, sitting down and talking to them. You know, you may suck at PlayStation, but go play a game with them. Find out what they like, what their dislikes are, what they, you know, are they married? Do they have a girlfriend? You know, what makes them tick? Hey, do you like to be the gunner? Do you like to be the driver? What do you like to do?
Yeah.
You know, stuff like that. So, you know, and it surprised me because he was a prior service guy from Echo 51st before my time. So he would sit in his air-conditioned chew with the first sergeant, and they would just play video games. And the only time I ever saw him was he never came around to visit anybody. And the only time I ever saw him was when we had officer call up at the battalion CP.
Yeah.
That was it.
Wow.
So,
well, you know, here's the thing. You can learn from great examples and great mentors, but if you've got a really bad one, you can learn what not to do, and
absolutely.
just as well, you know.
Well, this is 2006. So
Yeah,
this is
that's like the
6,
third
12.
beginning. Yeah,
This is 16 years or so into my career.
yeah.
The first officer, I'm like, ew. What the ew? You know, like my high schooler, ew, you know,
Yeah.
ew. And it's like, you know, I had one officer at Fort Campbell, Lieutenant Sheese.
Mm-hmm.
He was a MI guy,
Yeah.
but the colonel put him down there to be an infantry PL because he had a tab.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just to get some experience.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And he was not a bad officer. He was a horrible infantry officer because he was an infantry officer.
Yeah, he
But
would know. He would. He didn't know nothing.
but he tried,
Yeah.
and he was kind of like that lieutenant off Heartbreak Ridge, you know.
Yeah.
He would motivate you and cheer.
Yeah.
But this guy I ran to in Iraq, he like the prime example was I had a kid who was my gunner,
Mm-hmm.
and we were going down the road, and we were on Route Trans Am, which was a horrible route.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this is before Petraeus came in with the silly rules. So
Yeah.
we're cruising down the road, and at that time, Iraqis are, you know, this truck starts coming at us,
Mm-hmm.
and the my driver's moving. We're in the lead truck of the convoy, and he's moving off to the right,
Yeah.
and this truck is mirroring our movements.
Yeah. That's not
So,
good.
you know, Mathers grabs a shotgun, boom, 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 you know, and he shoots these guys, and it wasn't. I look back and now it's hysterical.
Yeah.
But he put some rounds through there, and we pull over and stop because the medic is back there, and he's like, "Hey, we need to treat these guys." Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So we pull over. The medic gets out. I think it was Carmichael, treats the guys. They didn't want any, you know, at the time you were handing out chits, you know, for stuff, and they didn't want any. So we were taking a guy to the airport that was leaving country down at Kirkuk. So we just continued mission. And then I get back and I get woken up in the middle of the night, and I got to go see this company commander.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of saying, "Hey, have a seat, let's talk what happened," he's got me standing in front of him in a position of attention. And he's just like, "Ah," and I'm like, I don't even get to explain. And I'm like, so finally I'm like, "Whoa, dude, let me explain." And he's like, and he wanted to fry Mathers. I'm like, "No, that's my call. That's my fault." I said, "You've got a kid who's 3 days," and I'm like, "now 2 days from getting on a helicopter and going back home after a year deployment over here. You know, he's seeing this truck coming at us, and he doesn't know if it's an IED because our battalion commander had got hit by one with a vehicle-borne IED. So, and I'm like, if someone needs to be held accountable, it's me." You know, and it goes back to that whole leadership thing. When everything goes good, it's they, them, or us. When it's bad, it's me, mine. And he was never that. He was never that kind of guy. So yeah.
It's all
So
kind
we did.
You know, one thing that's kind of interesting about your career is, you know, most guys, they do their platoon leader time, whatever, and then they go off and do their company commander time somewhere else. But you
Right.
stayed 101st, man.
So we came back from that, and then we ended up leaving that company. So we were actually a line platoon attached to the Delta Company.
Yeah.
And my platoon sergeant was phenomenal, Kevin Artis. In fact, he teaches the next county over from me. He
Mhm.
was, he would be like, hey, sir, you're not enlisted anymore. You supervise. That's your job. You supervise. You're not a trigger puller. I'm like, okay. And you know, he would have crushed me like a frog under the school bus. He's a big dude, real, but he's so smart. So
Yeah.
he you know, I got it. So we
Yeah.
came back and we ended up going back to our parent company in the same battalion, back to Charlie Company.
Yeah.
So the company commander, I was still a PL, company commander changed out.
Mhm.
And then, oh no, not yet. We're at the range and he comes in, he comes out there and he goes, hey, I got some good news. I got some bad news.
Yeah.
And you remember Band of Brothers when they were promoting winners to Battalion XO?
Yeah.
Kind of got that look on his face. And
Mhm.
so did Sobel when he
Yeah.
was being relieved. And it's like, well, who's going to take the company? To
Yeah.
me, it was that same look. Well, who's going to take the platoon?
Yeah.
He had brought my replacement out, and it
Yeah.
was Alex Hensley. So he's like, good news is you're getting promoted. Bad news is you're going to be the XO. So I'm
Yeah.
like, and no one wants to be the XO.
No, no one does.
You know, it's a horrible job
Yeah.
if
But it does prep you for command.
correct.
Yeah.
But it can be either a great job if you have a good commander, or it
Mhm.
can be a horrible job if you have a not so good commander. So it ended up being a horrible job for me.
Oh, well, you learn from it.
Well, and there's as an XO, you know, you have your way of accounting for property on the property book.
Hmm.
So, you know, we did the change of command inventories, and this guy came rolling in, Aaron L. Billingsley. So his XO time was down at 6th RTB,
Okay.
which is not, it's not like really XO time. So it's, I got boats, I got this, but it's not, you know, it's not like real XO time.
There's
So
not a lot of moving pieces. There's
no,
moving pieces, but it's set pieces that move the
correct.
same way every cycle.
So I'm your typical OCD ADD guy when it comes to property.
Yeah.
So highlighters are my life. So
Hmm.
property book, greens on hand, reds being coded out, yellows in maintenance, you know, blue would be signed out for school. And
Yeah.
I would sit there and I'd go through the property book, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
I let lieutenants do the 10%, but when it came to the 100% inventory, that was my job.
Yeah.
So the first inventory we did, I should have seen this disaster coming.
Hmm.
I did it in highlight, and I had the little legend on the side, what the color
Yeah.
stood for. And he's like, I don't like this. I'm like, what do you want? He goes, I like circles, X's, squares, triangles, and tick marks. I'm like, I can't read that. I
Yeah.
said, I got it, sir. I said, but I'm the one that keeps your property book for you. I keep you out of jail. I'm going to continue with my coloring
Yeah.
because the PBO also likes it because it's easier to see. And
Yeah.
when I run copies of it to keep it in the 3-ring binder that I keep religiously, I can see the colors.
Yeah.
So that was our first headbutt. The second one was I refused to participate in the chasing chickens for PT. Yeah, he watched Rocky 2 or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he got some chickens and he made him and the PL chase him around, and I pulled the XO card and went in the arms room, shut the door, locked it, did inventories.
That's kind of
So
that's
I,
unique.
yeah, and I think what really sunk everything was not just for our relationship, but
Yeah.
for his relationship with the headquarters element is we were
I,
loading the connexes for JRTC down at Fort Polk.
yeah.
And we had come up with this idea because you can't have metal to metal on the connex
Mhm.
rubbing. So I'm like, what if we get some plywood and we just line the connex with plywood?
Yeah.
You know, the floors and the walls.
Yeah.
And Mariah Haney's like, well, we could do the top two. We just need to get some 2x4s.
Yeah.
So went scavenging it and we did it. We figured this out and measured. I mean, it's infantry math with crayons, you know. Yeah. You got Sharpie crossing stuff out on the wood. And we were out there putting this thing together and we were loading the rifle racks.
Yeah.
I was out there without my top on. And he goes, XO, come here. And I walked over and he's like, what are you doing? I said, we're doing a proof of concept for the Connex.
Yeah.
Because if it works, this is the way we're going to move the stuff to Iraq, because we're getting ready to go for the surge. And he's like, and he was taught, most people are taller than me, but he was taught, he leaned down, he goes, you're an officer. You don't move stuff. You don't do manual work. And I'm like, I was at a loss for words. I'm like, okay. So he left, got in his car and left.
Yeah.
And and they're like, and I was pissed.
Yeah.
Because every time something that I get pissed, I'd put a big dip of Copenhagen in and I'd go, And they're like, apparently officers aren't supposed to do manual labor. I said, what are we lifting next? Yeah. So we started moving stuff in. So that was the Titanic hitting the iceberg. I started taking on water there.
Yeah.
It just went from bad to worse.
Yeah.
And
did you take him to, did he go to Iraq with you or did you go?
Yeah, so we did a rotation JRTC, and again, not having any experience or listening to people, which he didn't do. At this time we had good PLs that were learning. They weren't being mentored. Yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah, so they were being taught by their platoon sergeants who multiple deployments, phenomenal deployments, phenomenal platoon sergeants. But he did not like to get dirty for some reason. Yeah. So, you know, I was always taught when something happens and you're in charge, you know, it's kind of like you go to your point of domination. Well, for a company commander, it's someplace you can see everything. Yeah. You're not like this, you're like this. So I run to the roof and I'm up there and I can see the platoons and I can talk to, he's downstairs trying to run this whole thing off a 1 to 50,000 SMAP. Yeah. And so he gets on the radio and tells me, XO, shut up, I'm fighting the fight. Okay. So okay. I sit down and I start eating an MRE. You know? OC's like, what was that about? I'm like, the company commander's running the battle from the TOC from a 1 to 50,000 SMAP. Well, why is he not up here? I'm like, you know what, sir? I can't answer that question.
That's a good question. I'm wondering it myself.
Correct. So it went downhill, and then we deployed, got to Kuwait, and he went. At that time, they were doing some counterinsurgency academy in Iraq, and he went to that. So I got to bring the company forward, and then I ended up staying in that company probably for another, on deployment, a month and a half, until he went behind my back, and instead of counseling me,
hammered you.
He did counsel me, you know, and it was very specific questions, and they had to be a yes or no answer. So one question was, did you tell specialist, I think it was Castellano, that you were going to kick his ass? I'm like, yeah, but that wasn't in the context you're thinking. It was sarcasm, joking back and forth. Yeah. Like you tell me every day you're going to beat my ass is a joke. He goes, well, I want a yes or no answer. I'm like, we're done. I want a lawyer. Yeah. Because I saw what was coming. So anyway, he went behind my back and went up to the battalion commander. And, you know, I think the phrase now was lost trust, confidence in the ability of. Yeah. You know. So I got to read the letter that he gave to the battalion commander. I started laughing. I'm like, in the training room, NCO was like, hey, you need to read this. And I read it and I'm like, man, what a dipshit. So he was the best way I can describe, he was a divide and conquer commander. So if you didn't side with him, you were on the outs, and he tried getting rid of you. He purged that company of a lot of good people.
I have been in a very similar situation. Very similar.
Yeah. And he had a phenomenal first sergeant, a guy named Tim Rose, who just retired as sergeant major. He had a phenomenal first sergeant, but he did not allow his lieutenants to grow because it was micromanagement. It was zero defect.
Yeah.
But he was, and the problem was at that battalion at the time, you had the Alpha Company commander, Captain Metters, was the same way. And his first sergeant, Klinger, was my first sergeant for my first deployment.
Yeah.
He went from Delta Company to Alpha Company.
Yeah.
So it was a comedy of errors on that surge deployment. Yeah. And I'm surprised we didn't lose more people than we did.
Yeah.
But he ended up, you know, he wanted to be the I'm going to win the war guy. So, you know, he ended up getting a village elder, a Sons of Iraq leader, killed.
Yeah.
But nothing happened. So he ended up, they were going to raid this house, and he decided he was going to do Delta Force and do a 2-entry breach, which we don't do that because we're not Delta.
No.
So the guys go in one door. He brings this Sons of Iraq leader in another door. The guy had a weapon, and he's dressed like an Iraqi. He came through the door, and the NCO put 2 rounds in his chest.
Well, yeah, that kind of makes sense that would happen.
Right. So, in the guy, you know, the NCO remained nameless because he's a great guy. And in fact, we all went to one of our friends' funerals a couple months ago. So, you know, and we were doing a little bit of this. Yeah. And I said, "Who's the worst company commander you guys ever served under?" And all 10 of them at the same time, Billingsley. Yeah. So, and that says a lot because they were all NCOs. So, you know, we ended up surviving that deployment, but it was a hard time for a lot of us because we went from looking for bad people to do bad things to now you've got to now we're into a build rapport. It was the Petraeus doctrine, which got more people needlessly killed. Yeah. So it was, you know, you'll let the Iraqis share the road with you. You won't make them move over, even though they may have V-bed. Because when you're driving down the road, you're thinking about V-beds. Yeah. So it was a 180-degree turn, and I don't think we should have went 180 degrees. I think maybe 45 degrees would have been sufficient. Yeah. But it was, the battalion commander was a good guy. The sergeant major was a good guy, but it was a dysfunctional battalion. Yeah. Because you had all these commanders in their little own spaces doing their own little thing. You had a company commander calling the bad guy, telling him he needs to get his son out of town because regiment's coming to do a raid on him in his battle space. Yeah. You know, that we also had, that was the Behenna incident where Behenna I was part of that whole, I was in the 3 shop at the time, where Behenna took that insurgent. Ali Mansour out and executed him. Yeah. So, you know, I use that a lot for my ethics class when I teach. Yeah. So it was a great time because of the people I was surrounded with, but it was a bad time because of all the shit that was going on. Yeah. With you know, and I think we were there 15, 16 months. Yeah. And that is, you know, the divorces skyrocketed.
Yeah, that's a long deployment. That's a long trip.
Yeah, you know, and that was also stop loss. That's when the Army came out with that stupid stop loss thing. Yeah. So, you know, I ended up getting lucky at that time because all my peers were setting dates for the career course, captain's career course when they got back. And at that time, I wasn't ready to leave Campbell because my son was in school. I was still married.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in there talking to the battalion commander, and the brigade commander came in, and I was getting ready to leave. And he, you know, McBride goes, you got your can on you? Because I always had stateside Copenhagen.
Yeah.
So I gave it to him, and he's like, what's going on, Pete? To the battalion commander. He goes, I'm just talking to Mark here and seeing how we can prolong his stay on Fort Campbell. He doesn't want to go to the career course yet. And McBride looked at me and goes, how would you like to take a company? And right then, my treacherous mind started spinning. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
I want Bravo company. I want to go back to Beco. And he
Yeah.
looked at me, I didn't say, he goes, you're not going back to Beco. And I'm like,
Yeah.
damn it. He
Yeah.
goes, how about Charlie Company? I'm like, absolutely.
Heck yeah.
So that paved the way for me to start doing change of command inventories in Iraq.
Yay.
So near the end of our deployment, because I was one of the last guys to leave, I started doing change of command inventories in Iraq, staying down there while they were abandoning the connexes and stuff. And it took me, after that was done, it took me 18 hours to go as a crow flies in a Black Hawk, a 20-minute flight. It took me 18 hours to get back. So I ended up going from Woodcock down to Biap, all these little places. Then I ended up getting on a 47 that went up to Talifar with an ammo resupply of artillery rounds in it for the Marines. And then luckily there was a 47 that was going to fly past Beijing. And I said, please, for the love of God, can you stop? He's like, absolutely, hop on. So, yeah.
Hey, Mark, can I pause this for just a second?
Sure.